Good morning, everybody. We are starting today with the Vishnu Mahapurana, Skandha 2, Chapter 12. Parashara replied, continuing to describe the cosmology of the higher lokas and celestial bodies and such. The chariot of the moon has 3 wheels and is drawn by 10 horses of the whiteness of the jasmine, 5 on the right half of the yoke, 5 on the left. It moves along the asterisms, divided into ranges as before described, and in like manner as the sun is upheld by dhruva, the cords that fasten it being tightened or relaxed in the same way as it proceeds on its course. The horses of the moon, sprung from the bosom of the waters, drag the chariot for a whole kalpa, as do the coursers of the sun. The radiant sun supplies the moon, when reduced by the drafts of the gods to a single kala, in other words, when it has waned all the way to the new moon, with a single ray of light. And in the same proportion as the ruler of the night, which the ruler of the night is a name of the moon, was exhausted by the celestials, it is replenished by the sun, the plunderer of the waters. For the devas, Maitreya, drink the nectar and ambrosia accumulated in the moon during half the month, and from this being their food, they are immortal. 36,333 divinities drink the lunar ambrosia each month, is the idea. When 2 digits remain, the moon enters the orbit of the sun and abides in the ray called Ama, whence the period is termed Amavasya. In other words, what we call the new moon or the dark moon is Amavasya. In that orbit, the moon is immersed for a day and night in the water. Thence it enters the branches and shoots of the trees, and thence goes to the sun. Consequently, anyone who cuts off a branch or casts down a leaf while the moon is in the trees, the day of its rising invisible, or in other words, on the new moon, is guilty of Brahmanacide. When the remaining portion of the moon consists of but a 15th part, the Pitris approach it in the afternoon and drink the last portion, that sacred kala which is composed of ambrosia and contained in the 2 digits in the form of the moon. Having drunk the nectar effused by the lunar rays in the day of conjunction, the Pitris are satisfied and remain tranquil for the ensuing month. These Pitris are of 3 classes, termed Somyas, Varhishwadas, and Agnishvatas. In this manner, the moon, with its cooling rays, nourishes the devas in the light fortnight, meaning while the moon is waxing, the Pitris in the dark fortnight, while the moon is waning, vegetables with the cool nectary aqueous atoms it sheds upon them, and through their development it sustains humans, animals, and insects, at the same time gratifying them by its radiance. The chariot of the son of Chandra, Buddha, the deva of the planet Mercury, is composed of the elementary substances of air and fire, and is drawn by 8 bay horses of the speed of the wind. The vast chariot of Shukra is drawn by earthborn horses, is equipped with a protecting fender and a floor, armed with arrows and decorated by a banner. The splendid chariot of Bhoma is a name of Angaraka or Kuja Deva, meaning son of Bhumi, because Bhumi, the earth goddess, is his mother. His splendid chariot is of an octagonal shape, drawn by 8 horses, of a ruby red, sprung from fire. Brahaspati, in a golden chariot drawn by 8 pale-colored horses, travels from sign to sign in the period of a year, and the tardy-paced Shani moves slowly along in a car drawn by piebald steeds. 8 black horses draw the dusky chariot of Rahu, and once harnessed are attached to it forever. On the parvas, which are the lunar nodes, which are what, when they line up with the Earth and the Moon, cause lunar and solar eclipses, Rahu directs his course from the sun to the moon and back again from the moon to the sun. The 8 horses of the chariot of Ketu are of the dusky red color of lac, or the smoke of burning straw. Like smoke dark smoke just underlitten with the red of fire, like the color of the smoke just as it's rising off the straw, with like the red of flames underneath and the black of smoke rising. I have thus described to you, Maitreya, the chariots of the 9 Grahas, all of which are fastened to Dhruva by aerial cords. The orbs of all the Grahas, asterisms, and stars are attached to Dhruva and travel accordingly in their proper orbits, being kept in their places by their respective bands of subtle air. As many as are the stars, so many are the chains of air that secure them to Dhruva, and as they turn round, they cause the pole star also to revolve. In the same manner as the oil man himself going round causes the spindle to revolve, so the planets travel round, suspended by cords of air which are circling round a whirling center. The air, which is called pravaha, is so termed because it bears along the grahas, which turn round like a disk of fire driven by the aerial wheel. The celestial Shishumara, the porpoise or dolphin, in which Dhruva is fixed, has been mentioned, but you shall hear its constituent parts in more detail, as it is of great efficacy. For the view of it at night expiates whatever sin has been committed during the day, and those who behold it live as many years as there are stars in it, in the sky, or even more. Uttanapada is considered as its upper jaw, Yajna as its lower, Dharma is situated on its brow, Narayana in its heart. The Ashvins are its 2 forefeet, and Varuna and Aryamat its 2 hinder legs. Samvatsara is its sexual organ, Mitra its organ of excretion. Agni, Mahendra, Kashyapa, and Dhruva in succession are placed in its tail, which 4 stars in this constellation never set. I have now described to you the disposition of the earth and of the stars, of the insular zones with their oceans and mountains, their varshas or regions and their inhabitants. Their nature has also been explained, but it may be briefly recapitulated. From the waters, which are the body of Vishnu, was produced the lotus-shaped earth, with its seas and mountains. The stars are Vishnu, the worlds are Vishnu, forests, mountains, regions, rivers, oceans are Vishnu. He is all that is not. He, the Lord, is identical with knowledge, through which he is all forms, but is not a substance. You must conceive, therefore, mountains, oceans, and all the diversities of earth and the rest, as the illusions of the apprehension. When knowledge is pure, real, universal, independent of works, and exempt from defect, then the varieties of substance which are the fruit of the tree of desire cease to exist in matter. For what is substance? Where is the thing that is devoid of beginning, middle, and end, of one uniform nature? How can reality be predicated of that which is subject to change, and reassumes no more its original character? Earth is fabricated into a jar. The jar is divided into 2 halves. The halves are broken to pieces. The pieces become dust. The dust becomes atoms. Say, is this reality? Though it be so understood by humans, whose self-knowledge is impeded by their own acts. Hence, Brahmana, except discriminative knowledge, there is nothing anywhere, or at any time, that is real. Such knowledge is but one, although it appears manifold, as diversified by the various consequences of our own acts. Knowledge perfect, pure, free from pain, and detaching the affections from all that causes affliction, knowledge single and eternal, is the supreme Vasudeva, besides whom there is nothing. The truth has been thus communicated to you by me, that knowledge which is truth, from which all that differs is false. That information, however, which is of a temporal and worldly nature, has also been imparted to you. The yajna, the victim, the fire, the priests, the acid juice, the gods, the desire for heaven, the path pursued by acts of devotion and the rest, and the worlds that are their consequences have been displayed to you. In that universe, which I have described, he forever migrates who is subject to the influence of works. But he who knows Vasudeva to be eternal, immutable, and of one unchanging universal form, may continue to perform them, as thereby he enters into the deity. Chapter 13. Maitreya said, "Revered sir," and actually there's a slightly interesting note here, that of the three manuscripts of the Vishnu Purana, the one here that's being translated as Revered Sir actually gives an incredibly high title here. He addresses his Guru Parashara as Bhagavan Sarva Bhutesha, Sacred Sovereign Lord of all creatures, which is a very illustrious title to use for one's Guru. But the other two instead say Samyagakyatam, which just means all has been thoroughly explained. And so it's a little unclear whether that title was intended there. But Maitreya goes on. All that I asked of you has been thoroughly explained, namely the situation of the earth, oceans, mountains, rivers, and planetary bodies, the system of the three worlds, of which Vishnu is the stay. The great end of life has also been expounded by you, in the preeminence of holy knowledge. The end of life, in this case, meaning in the sense of like the goal of life, the object of life. It now remains that you fulfill the promise you made some time since of relating to me the story of King Bharata, and how it happened that a monarch like him, residing constantly at the sacred place Shalagrama and engaged in devotion, with his mind ever applied to Vasudeva, should have failed, through the sanctity of the shrine and the efficacy of his abstractions, to obtain final emancipation. How it was that he was born again as a Brahmana, and what was done by the magnanimous Bharata in that capacity. All this it is fit that you inform me. Parashara said, the illustrious monarch of the earth resided, Maitreya, for a considerable period at Shalagrama, his thoughts being wholly dedicated to God, and his conduct distinguished by kindness and every virtue, until he had effected in the highest degree the entire control over his mind. The Raja was ever repeating the names Yagnesha, Achyuta, Govinda, Madhava, Ananta, Keshava, Krishna, Vishnu, Rishikesha. Nothing else did he utter even in his dreams, nor upon anything but those names and their import did he ever meditate. He accepted fuel, flowers, and holy grass for the worship of the deity, but performed no other religious rites, being engrossed by disinterested abstract devotion. When we say he accepted these things, meaning that there were other brahmacharis nearby who brought him these things. On one occasion, he went to the Mahanadi, and there is a river in Orissa in India called the Mahanadi, but that's very likely not what we mean here. Mahanadi literally just means the great river. And since we're calling this place Shalagrama, the river in question is most likely the Gandaki River that the Shalagrama stones come from. So he went to the river for the purpose of ablution. He bathed there and performed the ceremonies usual after bathing. Whilst thus occupied, there came to the same place a doe, big with young, who had come out of the forest to drink of the stream. Whilst quenching her thirst, there was heard on a sudden the loud and fearful roaring of a lion, on which the doe, being excessively alarmed, jumped out of the water upon the bank. In consequence of this great leap, her fawn was suddenly brought forth and fell into the river, and the king, seeing it carried away by the current, caught hold of the young animal and saved it from being drowned. The injury received by the deer by her violent exertion proved fatal, and she lay down and died, which being observed by the royal ascetic, he took the fawn in his arms and returned with it to his hermitage. There he fed it and tended it every day, and it throve and grew up under his care. It frolicked about the cell and grazed upon the grass in its vicinity, and whenever it strayed to a distance and was alarmed at some wild beast, it ran back thither for safety. Every morning it sallied forth from home, and every evening returned to the thatched shelter of the leafy bower of Bharata. Whilst the deer was thus the inmate of his hermitage, the mind of the king was ever anxious about the animal, now wandering away and now returning to his side, and he was unable to think of anything else. He had relinquished his kingdom, his children, all his friends, and now indulged in selfish affection for a fawn. When absent for a longer time than ordinary, he would fancy that it had been carried off by wolves, devoured by a tiger or a lion. The earth, he would exclaim, is embrowned by the impressions of its hoofs. What has become of the young deer that was born for my delight? How happy I should be if he had returned from the thicket, and I felt his budding antlers rubbing against my arm. These tufts of sacred grass, of which the heads have been nibbled by his new teeth, look like pious lads chanting the Samaveda. because their hair would be cropped short. Thus the Muni meditated whenever the deer was long absent from him, and contemplated him with a, in other words, thus he meditated, as in, quote unquote, meditated on the deer, and contemplated him with a countenance animated with pleasure as he stood by his side. His abstraction was interrupted, the spirit of the king being engrossed by the fawn, even though he had abandoned family wealth and dominion. The firmness of the prince's mind became unsteady, and wandered with the wanderings of the young deer. In the course of time, the king became subject to its influence, to time's influence. He died, watched by the deer with tears in its eyes, like a son mourning for his father. And he himself, as he expired, cast his eyes upon the animal, and thought of nothing else, being wholly occupied with one idea. In consequence of this predominant feeling at such a season, meaning at the time of death, he was born again in the Jambumarga forest as a deer, with the faculty of recollecting his former life, which recollection inspiring a distaste for the world, he left his mother, a deer, and again repaired to the holy place, Shalagrama. Subsisting there upon dry grass and leaves, he atoned for the acts which had led to his being born in such a condition, and upon his death, he was next born as a Brahmana, still retaining the memory of his prior existence, his prior two existences. He was born in a pious and eminent family of ascetics who were rigid observers of devotional rites. Possessed of all true wisdom and acquainted with the essence of all sacred writings, he beheld soul as contradistinguished from Prakriti. Imbued with knowledge of self, he beheld the gods and all other beings as in reality the same. It did not happen to him to undergo investiture with the Brahmanical thread, nor to read the Vedas with a spiritual guru, nor to perform ceremonies, nor to study the scriptures. Whenever spoken to, he replied incoherently and in ungrammatical and unpolished speech. His person was unclean, and he was clad in dirty garments. Saliva dribbled from his mouth, and he was treated with contempt by all the people. Regard for the consideration of the world is fatal to the success of devotion. The ascetic who is despised of men attains the end of the abstractions. Let therefore a holy man pursue the path of a righteous without murmuring, and though men condemn him, avoid association with mankind. This the council of Hiranyagarbha did the Brahmana call to mind, and hence assumed the appearance of a crazy idiot in the eyes of the world. His food was raw pulse, pot herbs, wild fruit, and grains of corn. Whatever came in his way he ate as part of the necessary but temporary infliction, meaning the necessary but temporary infliction of having to sustain a physical body. Upon his father's death, he was set to work in the fields by the brothers and his nephews, and fed by them with vile food. And as he was firm and stout of make, and a simpleton in outward act, he was the slave of everyone that chose to employ him, receiving sustenance alone for his hire. The head servant of the king of Salvira, looking upon him as an indolent, untaught Brahmana, thought him a fit person to work without pay, and took him into his master's service to assist in carrying the palanquin. The king, having ascended his litter on one occasion, was proceeding to the hermitage of Kapila on the banks of the Ikshumati river. To consult the sage, to whom the virtues leading to liberation were known, what was most desirable in a world abounding with care and sorrow. Amongst those who by the order of his head servant had been compelled gratuitously to carry the litter was the Brahmana, who had been equally pressed into this duty, and who, endowed with the holy universal knowledge and remembering his former existence, bore the burden as the means of expiating the faults for which he was desirous to atone. Fixing his eyes upon the pole that he was carrying, he went tardily along, whilst the other bearers moved with alacrity, and the king, feeling the litter carried unevenly, called out, "Ho, bearers, what is this? Keep equal pace together." Still it proceeded unsteadily, and the Raja again exclaimed, "What is this? How irregularly you are going." When this had repeatedly occurred, the palanquin bearers at last replied to the king, "It is this man who lags in his pace." "How is this?" said the prince to the Brahmana. "Are you weary? You have carried your burden but a little way. Are you unable to bear fatigue? Yet you look robust." The Brahmana answered and said, "It is not I who am robust, nor is it by me that your palanquin is carried. I am not wearied, prince, nor am I incapable of fatigue." The king replied, "I clearly see that you are stout, and that the palanquin is borne by you, and the carriage of a burden is wearisome to all persons." "First tell me," said the Brahmana, what it is of me that you have clearly seen, and then you may distinguish my properties as strong or weak. The assertion that you behold the palanquin borne by me, or placed on me, is untrue. Listen, prince, to what I have to remark. The place of both the feet is the ground, the legs are supported by the feet, the thighs rest upon the lower legs, and the belly reposes on the thighs, the chest is supported by the belly, and the arms and shoulders are propped up by the chest. The palanquin is borne upon the shoulders, and how can it be considered as my burden? This body which is seated in the palanquin is defined as you, thence what is elsewhere called. This is here distinguished as I, and you and others are constructed of the elements. And the elements, following the stream of qualities, assume a bodily shape. But qualities such as gunas, such as sattva and the rest, are dependent upon acts, and acts accumulated in ignorance influence the condition of all beings. The pure imperishable soul, tranquil, void of gunas, preeminent over prakriti, is one without increase or diminution in all bodies. But if it be equally exempt from increase or diminution, then with what propriety can you say to me, "I see that you are robust"? If the palanquin rests on the shoulders, and they on the body on the feet, and the feet on the earth, then is the burden borne as much by you as by me. When the nature of men is different, either in its essence or its cause, then it may be said that fatigue is to be undergone by me. That which is the substance of the palanquin is the substance of you and me and all others, being an aggregate of elements, aggregated by individualities. Having thus spoken, the Brahmana was silent, and went on bearing the palanquin, but the king leaped out of it, and hastened to prostrate himself at the Brahmana's feet, saying, "Have compassion on me, Brahman, and cast aside the palanquin, and tell me who you are, thus disguised under the appearance of a fool." The Brahmanan answered and said, "Hear me, Raja. Who I am it is not possible to say. Arrival at any place is for the sake of fruition, and enjoyment of pleasure or endurance of pain is the cause of the production of the body. A living being assumes a corporeal form to reap the results of virtue or vice. The universal cause of all living creatures is virtue or vice. Why therefore inquire into the cause of my being the person I appear?" The king said, "Undoubtedly virtue and vice are the causes of all existent effects, and migration into several bodies is for the purpose of receiving their consequences. But with respect to what you have asserted, that it is not possible for you to tell me who you are, that is a matter which I am desirous to hear explained. How can it be impossible, Brahmana, for anyone to declare himself to be that which he is? There can be no detriment to oneself from applying to it the word I." The Brahmana said, "It is true that there is no wrong done to that which is oneself by the application to it of the word I, but the term is characteristic of error, of conceiving that to be the self which is not self or soul. The tongue articulates the word I, aided by the lips, the teeth, and the palate, and these are the origin of the expression, as they are the causes of the production of speech. If by these instruments speech is able to utter the word I, it is nevertheless improper to assert that speech itself is I. The body of a man, characterized by hands, feet, and the like, is made up of various parts. To which of these can I properly apply the denomination I? If another being is different specifically from me, most excellent monarch, then it may be said that this is I, that is the other. But when only one soul is dispersed in all bodies, it is then idle to say, "Who are you? Who am I? You are a king. This is a palanquin. These are the bearers. These are the running footmen. This is your retinue." Yet it is untrue that all these are said to be yours. The palanquin on which you sit is made of timber derived from a tree. What then? Is it denominated either timber or a tree? People do not say that the king is perched upon a tree, nor that it is seated upon a piece of wood when you have mounted your palanquin. The vehicle is assemblage of pieces of timber, artificially joined together. Judge, prince, for yourself in what the palanquin differs really from the wood. Again, contemplate the sticks of the umbrella and their separate state. Where then is the umbrella? Apply this reasoning to you and me. A man, a woman, a cow, a goat, a horse, an elephant, a bird, a tree, are names assigned to various bodies which are the consequences of acts. Man is neither a god, nor a man, nor a brute, nor a tree. These are mere varieties of shape, the effects of acts. The thing which in the world is called a king, the servant of a king, or by any other appellation, is not a reality. It is the creature of our imaginations. For what is there is the world that is subject to vicissitude, that does not in the course of time go by different names. You are called the monarch of the world, the son of your father, the enemy of your foes, the husband of your wife, the father of your children. What shall I denominate you? How are you situated? Are you the head or the belly, or are they yours? Are you the feet, or do they belong to you? You are, O king, distinct in your nature from all your members. Now then, rightly understand the question. Think who I am, and how it is possible for me, after the truth is ascertained of the identity of all, to recognize any distinction, or to speak of my own individuality by the expression I. Chapter 14. Parashara said, having heard these remarks, full of profound truth, the king was highly pleased with the Brahmana, and respectfully thus addressed him. What you have said is no doubt the truth, but in listening to it, my mind is much disturbed. You have shown that to be discriminative wisdom which exists in all creatures, and which is the great principle that is distinct from plastic nature. But the assertions, I do not bear the palanquin does not rest upon me, the body by which the vehicle is conveyed is different from me, the conditions of elementary beings are influenced by acts through the influence of the qualities, and the qualities of the principles of action. What sorts of positions are these? Upon these doctrines entering into my ears, my mind, which is anxious to investigate the truth, is lost in perplexity. It was my purpose, illustrious sage, to have gone to Kapila Rishi to inquire of him what in this life was the most desirable object. But now that I have heard from you such words, my mind turns to you to become acquainted with the great end of life. The Rishi Kapila is a portion of the mighty and universal Vishnu, who has come down upon the earth to dissipate delusion. And surely it is he who, in kindness to me, has thus manifested himself to me in all that you have said. To me, thus suppliant, then, explain what is the best of all things, for you are an ocean overflowing with the waters of divine wisdom. The Brahmana replied to the king, you again ask me what is the best of all things, not what is the great end of life. So there's a subtlety here in the Sanskrit. He's saying you ask what is Shreyas, not what is Paramartha. So Shreyas literally means best or most excellent, but it typically denotes temporary and special objects, sources of happiness like wealth, power, children, etc. Paramartha means the one great object or end of life, true wisdom or truth, knowledge of the real and universal nature of soul. So that's what the Brahmana is pointing out. But there are many things which are considered best, as well as those which are the great ends or truths of life. To him who, by the worship of the gods, seeks for wealth, prosperity, children, or dominion, each of these is respectively best. Best is the right, or yajna, that is rewarded with heavenly pleasures. Best is that which yields the best recompense, although it be not solicited. Self-contemplation, ever practiced by devout ascetics, is to them the best. But best of all is the identification of soul with the Supreme Spirit, or the identification of Atman with the Paramatma. Hundreds and thousands of conditions may be called the best, but these are not the great and true ends of life. Hear what those are. Wealth cannot be the true end of life, or it may be relinquished through virtue, and its characteristic property is expenditure for the gratification of desire. If a sun were final truth, that would be equally applicable to a different source, for the sun that is to one the great end of life becomes the father of another. Final or supreme truth, therefore, would not exist in this world. As in all these cases, those objects which are so denominated are the effects of causes, and consequently are not finite. What we mean by are not finite is they're part of an ongoing chain of causality. They're not at one end of the chain. If the acquisition of sovereignty were designated by the character of being the great end of all, then finite ends would sometimes be and sometimes cease to be. If you suppose that the objects to be affected by sacrificial rites performed according to the rules of the Rig, Yajur, and Sama Vedas to be the great end of life, Attend to what I have to say. Any effect which is produced through the causality of earth partakes of the character of its origin and consists itself of clay. So any act performed by perishable agents such as fuel, ghee, and kusha grass must itself be of but temporary efficacy. The great end of life, the truth, is considered by the wise to be eternal, but it would be transient if it were accomplished through transitory things. If you imagine that this great truth is the performance of religious acts from which no recompense is sought, it is not so. For such acts are the means of attaining liberation, and truth is the end, not the means. Meditation on self, again, is said to be for the sake of supreme truth, but the object of this is to establish distinctions between soul and body, and the great truth of all is without distinctions. Union of self with supreme spirit is said to be the great end of all, but this is false, for one substance cannot become substantially another. Objects, then, which are considered most desirable are infinite. What the great end of all is, you shall, monarch, briefly learn from me. It is soul, one in all bodies, pervading, uniform, perfect, preeminent over Prakriti, exempt from birth, growth, and decay, omnipresent, undecaying, made up of true knowledge, independent, and unconnected with unrealities, with name, species, and the rest, in time present, past, or to come. The knowledge that this spirit, which is essentially one, is in one's own and in all other bodies, is the great end, or true wisdom of one who knows the unity and the true principles of things. As one diffusive air passing through the perforations of a flute is distinguished as the notes of the scale, so the nature of the great spirit is single, though its forms be manifold, arising from the consequences of acts. When the difference of the investing form as that of God or the rest is destroyed, then there is no distinction. Chapter 15. Parashara continued. Having terminated these remarks, the Brahmana repeated to the silent and meditating prince a tale illustrative of the doctrines of unity. The Brahmana said, "Listen, prince, to what was formerly uttered by Ribhu, imparting holy knowledge to the Brahmana Nidagha. Ribhu was a son of the supreme Brahma, who from his innate disposition was of a holy character and acquainted with true wisdom. Nidagha, the son of Pulastya, was his disciple, and to him Ribhu communicated willingly perfect knowledge, not doubting of his being fully confirmed in the doctrines of unity when he had been thus instructed. The residence of Pulastya was at Viranagara, a large, handsome city on the banks of the Devika River. In a beautiful grove adjoining to the stream, the pupil of Ribhu, Nidagha, conversant with devotional practices, abode. When 1,000 divine years had elapsed, Ribhu went to the city of Pulastya to visit his disciple. Standing at the doorway at the end of a yajna to the Vishvadevas, he was seen by his scholar, who hastened to present him the usual offering, the arghya, and conduct him into the house. And when his hands and feet were washed and he was seated, Nidagha invited him respectfully to eat. And that is when the following dialogue ensued. Ribhu said, "Tell me, illustrious Brahmana, what food there is in your house, for I am not fond of indifferent viands." Nidagha said, "There are cakes of meal, rice, barley, and pulse in the house. Partake, venerable sir, of whichever best please you." Ribhu said, "None of these do I like. Give me rice boiled with sugar, wheaten cakes, and milk with curd and molasses." Nidagha said, "Ho, dame," an archaic way of asking his wife, "be quick and prepare whatever is most delicate and sweet in the house to feed our guest." Having thus spoken, the wife of Nidagha, in obedience to her husband's commands, prepared sweet and savory food and set it before the Brahmana, and Nidagha, having stood before him until he had eaten of the meal which he had desired, thus reverentially addressed him. Nidagha said, "Have you eaten sufficiently and with pleasure, great Brahmana? And has your mind received contentment from your food? Where is your present residence? Whither do you purpose going, and whence, holy sir, have you now come?" Ribhu said, "A hungry man, Brahmana, must needs be satisfied when he has finished his meal. Why should you inquire if my hunger has been appeased? When the earthly element is parched by fire, then hunger is engendered and thirst is produced. When the moisture of the body has been absorbed by the internal digestive heat, Hunger and thirst are the functions of the body, and satisfaction must always be afforded me by that which they are removed, by which they are removed. For when hunger is no longer sensible, and by sensible we mean is no longer sensed, when hunger is no longer felt, pleasure and contentment of mind are faculties of the intellect. Ask their condition of the mind then, for man is not affected by them. For your three other questions, where I dwell, whither I go, and whence I come, hear this reply. The soul of man goes everywhere, and penetrates everywhere like the ether. And is it rational to inquire where it is, or whence or whither you go? I am neither going nor coming, nor is my dwelling in any one place, nor are you, thou, nor are others, nor am I. If you wonder what reply I should make to your inquiry why I made any distinction between sweetened and unsweetened food, you shall hear my explanation. What is there that is really sweet or not sweet to one eating a meal? That which is sweet is no longer so, and it occasions the sense of repletion, and that which is not sweet becomes sweet, and a man being very hungry fancies that it is so. What food is there that first, middle, and last is equally grateful? As a house built of clay is strengthened by fresh plaster, so is this earthly body supported by earthly particles, and barley, wheat, pulse, butter, oil, milk, curds, treacle, fruits, and the like are composed of atoms of earth. This therefore is to be understood by you, that the mind which properly judges of what is or is not sweet is impressed with the notion of identity, and that this effect of identity tends to liberation. Having heard these words, conveying the substance of ultimate truth, Nidagha fell at the feet of his visitor and said, Show favor to me, illustrious Brahmana, and tell me who it is that for my good has come hither, and whose words the infatuation of my mind, and by whose words the infatuation of my mind is dissipated. To this Ribhu answered, I am Ribhu, your guru, come hither to communicate to you true wisdom, and having declared to you what that is, I shall depart. Know this whole universe to be the one undivided nature of the Supreme Spirit, entitled Vasudeva. Thus having spoken and receiving the prostrate homage of Nidagha, rendered with fervent faith, Ribhu went his way. Chapter 16. After the expiration of another 1,000 years, and the first 1,000 were Daiva years, so I'm assuming this means another 1,000 Daiva years, Ribhu again repaired to the city where Nidagha dwelt, to instruct him farther in true wisdom. When he arrived near the town, he beheld a prince entering into it, with a splendid retinue, and his pupil Nidagha standing afar off, avoiding the crowd, his throat shriveled with starvation, and bearing from the thicket fuel and holy grass. Ribhu approached him, and saluting him reverentially, as if he was a stranger, demanded why he was standing in such a retired spot. Nidagha replied, There is a great crowd of people attending the entrance of the king into the town, and I am staying here to avoid it. Tell me, excellent Brahmana, said Ribhu, for I believe that you are wise, which is here the king, and which is any other man? The king, answered Nidagha, is he who is seated on the fierce and stately elephant, vast as the mountain peak. The others are his attendants. You have shown me, observed Ribhu, at one moment the elephant and the king, without noticing any peculiar characteristic by which they may be distinguished. Tell me, venerable sir, is there any difference between them? For I am desirous to know which is here the elephant, and which the king. The elephant, answered Nidagha, is underneath, the king is above him. Who is not aware, Brahmana, of the relation between that which bears and that which is born? To this Ribhu rejoined, Still, explain to me, according to what I know of it, this matter. What is it that is meant by the word underneath, and what is it that is termed above? As soon as he had uttered this, Nidagha jumped upon Ribhu and said, Here is my answer to the question you have asked. I am above like the Raja. You are underneath like the elephant. This example, Brahmana, is intended for your information. Very well, said Ribhu. You, it seems, are as it were the Raja, and I am like the elephant. But come now, do you tell me which of the two of us is you, which is I? Brahmana said. When Nidagha heard these words, he immediately fell at the feet of the stranger, and said, Of a surety you are my saintly guru Ribhu. The mind of no other person is so fully imbued with the doctrines of unity as that of my guru, and hence I know that you are he. To this Ribhu replied, I am your guru by name Ribhu, who, pleased with the dutiful attention he has received, has come to Nidagha to give him instruction. For this purpose, I have briefly intimated to you divine truth, the essence of which is the non-duality of all. Having thus spoken to Nidagha, the Brahmana Ribhu went away, leaving his disciple profoundly impressed by his instructions with belief in unity. He beheld all beings thenceforth as the same with himself, and perfect and holy knowledge obtained final liberation. In like manner, do you, O king, who knows what duty is, regarding equally friend or foe, consider yourself as one with all that exists in the world, even as the same sky is apparently diversified as white or blue. So soul, which is in truth but one, appears to erroneous vision distinct in different persons. That one which here is all things is Achyuta, that whom there is, than whom there is none other. He is I, he is thou, he is all. This universe is his form. Abandon the error of distinction. Parashara continued. The king, being thus instructed, opened his eyes to truth and abandoned the notion of distinct existence, whilst the Brahmana, who through the recollection of his former lives had acquired perfect knowledge, obtained now exemption from future birth. Whoever narrates or listens to the lessons inculcated in the dialogue between Bharata and the king has his mind enlightened, mistakes not the nature of individuality, and the course of his migrations becomes fitted for ultimate emancipation. That is the end of Skandha 2 of the Vishnu Purana. And I'm thinking to perhaps end there for today. It's a slightly short session, but it's a good cutoff point to end at the break of one skandha to another.
Thank you so much, as always.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for coming.
Right. Thank you so much. And I've sent you on your new phone number on the WhatsApp. I've sent you 2 information that I had mentioned. I just did it. If there is anything, let me know. So you are in connect with the Paramarth person, and they know. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Right. Yeah. And actually, Vasvi Devi and her entire family, they're all over there right now.
Yeah, they're there now, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So let me know how I can bring a comfort to your stay while you're in Rishikesh.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
No comment from Andy today. I always learned.
That was a deep reading, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I always learn from whenever you ask the question. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'll have to watch the YouTube clip on this one.
Go through it again. Yeah. It was basically just pure.
What's the name of the Brahmin talking to the prince?
He never. No name was ever mentioned. Well, I mean, so 2 births before he had been named Bharata. 1 birth before he was a deer, who presumably no one gave a name to the wild deer. And in that birth, presumably his parents gave him a name, but he cared so little about it that Parashara never even saw fit to mention it. It was to even identify himself with a name would kind of be anathema to his philosophy. So that's why it always just referred to him as the Brahmana.
I love that story, and I appreciate hearing it more fully. Where I had left off in reading was his life as the deer, and how he would go to the ashram and listen to the readings and recitations. And that wasn't mentioned but I guess each book has a different angle on the same stories.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you again. Yeah.
Namaste.
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 Haribol.